All right, so we've reached the final part of the day. Very excited to welcome our partner investigator, Andy Watts, to the lectern to talk a little bit about open as opportunity. Andy has been really instrumental, I think, in shaping up the way that our industry engagement has happened, and the hackathons and all the sort of interactions with the PhD, shaping up the PhD topics. Andy has had a big say in this, and so first of all, we just want to thank you for your contribution, but also very encouraging of the sort of learning curve, I guess, and very supportive of our students. So that's been really great. I'm just going to read the short bio that you've given to introduce you. So Andy Watts is the head of design technology at Grimshaw and leads the practice's global design technology team, overseeing digital disciplines such as computational design, BIM, extended reality, urban computation, applications development, and environmental performance. Beyond Grimshaw, Andy has continued to drive for an open approach to technology, including co-authoring the Future AEC Software Specification, which I believe you'll talk a little bit about now. So everybody please put your hands together and welcome Andy.
Great, thank you very much. First of all, is this mic actually working?
Can you all hear Andy?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Okay. All right. Well, first of all, thank you to Hank, to Ivana, and to the rest of the Arc Manu team. It is a privilege to be here today as part of this first research symposium. Seeing the culmination of the first 6 months of this program. So yes, as Ivana said, I am Andy Watts. I'm the head of design technology at Grimshaw, but here today I'm in the stead of, I am a partner investigator for Arc Manu alongside Eric Escalante representing Grimshaw. So this isn't a Grimshaw speech, but it's worthwhile understanding the context within which a lot of the thinking that I'm going to be talking about has originated. Obviously, we are a major architectural practice. We're international. We started in 1980, and we have offices in 8 cities, 7 time zones, looking about 600 staff across the world. And I think it's worth noting that at Grimshaw, we don't have a particular house style. But when you look under the cover of what we do and really dig into it, you'll notice some common themes that run throughout. Those are things that we have a penchant for scale. We work on complex projects, but we also have a very close attention to detail as well. We are good at problem solving. We also have a very strong concern when it comes to sustainability and the drive for net zero carbon. But because of all of these things, the complexity, the attention to detail and sustainability, we need to have a very strong technological response to enable our project teams to meet the demands that face them on a day-to-day basis. And that's where our design technology team comes into play. So as Ivana said, I'm the head of design technology. I oversee our global design technology initiatives. That includes specialists across our core technology disciplines of BIM, of computational design, of urban computation, environmental performance, extended reality, and internal applications development as well. And as Grimshaw is a global practice, we are also a global team. We have a distributed network of specialists across the globe of around 30 staff looking at various different digital disciplines. And the way that we tend to operate is that we seek to embed that digital expertise into our projects to enable our architectural teams to work to the best of their ability, to help them to live the day-to-day problems, to train them, but also to build out pockets of digital knowledge that can then be shared across projects and across geographies as well. And this is all based on this ethos that Grimshaw is a design-led practice enabled by the appropriate use of technology. And it's really, in this statement, it's particularly that idea of design and technology that we're focusing on today as part of this topic. The dynamic between technology and design has shifted, and it's going to continue to shift. Where technology was once seen by some as at odds with the process of design, it's now more and more relevant and necessary to architectural teams in the delivery of any design vision that they have. With that said, that evolution is not always seamless. Adoption is still an issue. I think this is something that we've heard a lot about today, whether that's through resistance, whether it's through hesitancy, or frankly, a lack of understanding. And in that, we're just talking at an organizational level. At an industry level, we have a field with very different players at various stages of their own digital transformation, quite often trying to tackle the same challenges in the same ways, but actually in their own disparate silos of activity. And then, as I'm sure everyone is aware, the nature of the business is starting to place focus on some very changing parameters, whether that's through quality, whether it's through a pressure on us to do things in a reduced amount of time, and also to do things at a lower cost. But there's also this emerging trend of fragmentation as well. We're no longer in an industry where a project is won and we work on it for 6 years until it's built. We now have to deal with packages of work that might be released on a weekly basis, on a fortnightly basis, monthly, choose your unit of time. But we also have to deal with the fact that our clients are becoming more savvy. They are wanting to maybe retender projects at every stage after certain key pieces of work. It's no longer a case that we as an industry work on a project from start to finish. The work has become fragmented. And then internally within our organizations at a personnel level, our skills and literacy varies. At one end of the spectrum, we've got very talented specialists discussing how AI is going to augment us, whilst at the other end, we sometimes struggle to introduce members of our team to the third dimension. And all of this is set in the context of major challenges and responsibilities that face us as an industry, whether that be the race to achieve net zero carbon, or the need to improve the safety of our built environment. We need a much more transparent and intelligent approach to data and its provenance, as we saw in the last presentation. And that's where the title of this presentation comes into play. The idea that openness, both in practice and in industry, is an opportunity for us. Many of the challenges described of adoption, integration, and collaboration, they can be tackled through a more open dialogue that enables change and works with the transformative qualities of technology. But making technology accessible is not just the flip of a switch. This change to openness needs to happen at both an organizational level, but also at an industry-wide level as well. And so for this talk, I'll talk about two particular questions. And as I put forward the responses to these questions, I'll do so in the context of Grimshaw as an architectural practice, but also its position in the wider industry as well. In the first instance, for architectural practices, the opportunity demands a focus on enabling designers to engage in technology more readily. And for the wider industry, progressing existing tools or leading on new solutions means that a more open and collaborative approach needs to be taken as well. So, first of all, that first question, how do we allow teams to engage with technology? We've found from our own experience that this engagement happens through open approaches to access, to information exchange, to language, and to ideas. So let's step through those. So, open access. For designers to really engage and leverage technology, access is critical. We need to expose our teams to technology, enable them to learn through doing. And that can be enabled through promoting technology expertise directly into design and project teams, as we've already described, bringing these two worlds together of design and technology, as opposed to having a siloed team pulled in at particular stages as a project progresses. And for us, this integrated approach is fed by a centralized design technology team, the Grimshaw DT team, comprising of specialists across a range of different digital disciplines. They all work together to test and deliver the best solutions to projects. So I'll repeat that. Our DT disciplines collaborate with one another. We do not seek technological silos. We do not have a BIM team that doesn't speak to a computation team that doesn't speak to an XR team. We have collaborative design technology teams, and we have collaborative design teams as well. And so as well as embedding specialist expertise into projects, we also need to improve accessibility through visibility and through increasing knowledge, whether that's through internal training or knowledge sharing, through specialist talks, through CPDs, through information repositories. We've very much made the effort to give designers every opportunity to access the technology that they need at a particular moment in time. And this approach to accessibility extends to personal development as well, including our work around monitoring and raising the digital literacy of the practice, both through a formal approach to upskilling in digital literacy, but also through to hands-on experimentation and ad hoc teaching as well. And so next up is exchange. With technology being made more accessible, knowledge needs to smoothly transfer between projects and teams. We need to create mobility in technology and its specialists across the practice and the wider industry as well. So we know that technology inherently creates more mobile working processes. You know, the move to the cloud, the ability for people to work remotely from wherever and collaborate remotely. However, the next step in that mobility is execution, leveraging different expertise at the most effective time for a project. As a global organization, we're also able to draw on expertise from across our international portfolio to import and export expertise as we see fit. And whilst we're still working on it, these are still works in progress for us. It's becoming vital as we seek to work more efficiently. There is no point for us to create 4 carbon copies of the same digital team in 4 different regions of the world. We should be working much more nimbly and exporting and exchanging expertise and knowledge across our network. And by sharing expertise and leaning into more specialist pools of knowledge, we're able to create a much richer wealth of knowledge globally. And further amplifying this is the cross-discipline opportunities that we've built. The Grimshaw examples include work by our urban computation team, which has pulled together expertise from urban design, from computational design, from applications development to create a suite of tools which all designers have access to. These are developed without a specific project in mind, or rather are intended to be both project and geographically agnostic, allowing every project to benefit from the efficiencies that they bring. But then also to reinforce that point around exchanging, we've structured our design technology team to enable that. We want to enable mobility and the mixing of specialist skills between disciplines to bring everything that they can to a project. It's vital to make sure that technology is being used to its full potential. And then language is an interesting point. I think many of us can recognize that technology comes with a certain amount of baggage when it comes to language. We have very specialist terms and words that are alien and often actually create barriers to open engagement with design teams who may not be as embedded in that technology world. We do know, however, that the outcome wanted by both our technology and our design teams is the same. So what we need to do is develop a common language of recognition, and that becomes the essential part. So here's a case in point for us. Let's take a simple statement. As a technology team, we have capabilities in BIM, computational design, extended reality, urban computation, application development. Great. That's what we as a technology team are comfortable with. That's the taxonomy that we use pretty much every single day. But that's less important to design teams who actually want to know how they can ideate when it comes to designs, how they can test design performance, how they can deliver and document their work, how they can engage with stakeholders, how they can add value. These are the things that design teams can relate to, and this is what they want to be able to do. And quite simply, this means bringing together the what, i.e. what is it that we as a technology team do, and why, i.e. why are we doing it in the first place. The design technology teams know what is possible. A design team knows why they need that technology in the first place, and they know how it will enable and augment a project. And so what we start to do is we move from a technical and program-based language, whether it's BIM, computational design, extended reality, etc., to an impact and outcome-based lexicon, such as ideation, performance, and engagement. And in doing so, we start to really see the benefits that this unsiloed approach to technology can bring. By allowing an open dialogue and cross-pollination of expertise between specialisms, we start to see how DT as an overarching function can enable project teams. And then lastly, in this section where we focus on industry, is this idea, well, it is ideas. We're constantly pushing against the borders of what technology can offer through exploration and ideas. We're always seeking to experiment with what we do. And it's something that I think a lot of those attending this symposium today can actually relate to, and they see, and I think we can start to see what's coming out in the PhDs in the future. Whether that's through reading around a subject or actively developing tools and solutions that can serve to fill gaps in a tool set. For us, examples include applications around stakeholder engagement, allowing our clients to remotely access and explore design options, or developing rudimentary analysis to help us do our work at a much faster clip. But then going through into more immersive and experimental visualization techniques as well. But beyond the tools that we use for our core service, we also need to be open to new ideas about how we work as a business, how we actually look at our operations. More recently, we've started to break this down into core pillars of people, of projects, and of practice. And we can't really talk about, organizational-based digital transformation without drawing insight from other industries and how technology has been used to bring systems and processes together. None of these are perfect, but they're still ripe for learning lessons from. And so we started to think about how our own processes can feed off one another. So let's take a standard project and start to think about how the different functions around the periphery of that project can start to change, how they can start to evolve. What if we knew everything about our design decisions by default? What if insight was a passive function that happened by default through connections made back to our design information, whether that's understanding the sustainability impact or project management goals or urban impact, or whether it's just through real-time visualization. By bringing together various different functions, we can start to enable this. What if our systems actually understood our deliverables? What if we establish KPIs at the beginning of a project that enables us to do things as simple as issue an invoice on time when a certain thing has been digitally met? With that insight, could that mean that our project teams would work more differently? Would they work more efficiently, more goal-based? And quite a simple one. What if we actually spent more time on design than post-production? That could be quite a thing. And to do that, we can bring together our various different design enabling disciplines, whether that's project teams, TGI, graphics, to actually streamline that process completely to enable us to actually do more of what we want to do, which is design. And so that was all based around how we can enable better engagement with technology at a practice level. But what about at an industry level? For any practice conversant in embracing and enabling technology, there needs to be a landscape within the industry that likewise delivers on the opportunity of being open and collaborative. We know there are barriers. Some of those have been discussed today. But in the context of this talk, I would point out two in particular. One is that the construction industry is historically notoriously slow on digital transformation. Most of you in the audience have probably seen an industry talk where digital transformation in the construction industry has been discussed, and will know the exact McKinsey slide that shows how far down the table the construction industry is. And secondly, as a result of pressure on fees and scope, architecture is incredibly competitive, with firms very protective over IP. The former of these issues around digital transformation is well established, but absolutely needs to be tackled, given the emphasis placed on construction in broader sustainable and economic conversations. The latter is an area where we can begin to influence a change ourselves. So first up on these is collaboration. And let's clear up what I mean by this. When it comes to our product, our design, our commercial offer, then of course we have to remain competitive. That's how we stay in business. That's how we make our money. But when it comes to our tool set, our technology, and I'm not talking about bespoke tools that might give us a particular advantage. I'm talking about our generic everyday tool set. There are definitely opportunities for us to collaborate as an industry through a much more open dialogue. Why would we do this? I mean, the AEC industry is rife with inefficiency as our firms, frankly, we're tackling the same problems through technology and reinventing the same wheels across all of our industries, all of our practices, and all of our geographies. So an obvious step in collaboration is defining a specific network or group of partners. At Grimshaw, we have a very broad range of partners across the spectrum, including academia, industry, government, software, and pro bono organizations as well. These are the people that we engage and we have engaged with and do engage with to actually push forward ideas where we can. There are others on this list, but this is just a snapshot. But also, we seek to collaborate beyond our comfort zone. A case in point for this is the Construction Innovation Hub, which I was part of with our London studio in the UK. The CIH was one of the biggest research consortia that we've been part of. It brought together 50 plus industry partners directly, 200 indirectly, 3 technology centres, and 5 government departments to look at a platform approach to DFMA. It was exciting, but it definitely pushed us outside of our comfort zone because we were having to look up and down the supply chain from where we would normally position ourselves. Because we as Grimshaw were part of the overarching design and digital leadership for that program. But that helped us to understand our place and what we can offer to actually affect that change at a much larger scale. And obviously then there's the reason that we're here today. This is, I would suggest, probably the most exciting research-based collaboration that we have the privilege to be part of. And that's not an exaggeration. I mean, look at the numbers that are involved. It's 3 universities, it's 28 PhDs. There's a huge amount to gain from being part of this. But also, alongside academia and peak bodies, we're working with industry partners who, frankly, are normally our competitors on a day-to-day basis. But as part of this, we're actively collaborating as part of this wider program. We've already seen some of that starting to bear fruit through 2 fantastic hackathons and a lot of more fruitful conversations as well on the side of that. But there can be pitfalls around collaboration, and this is where I probably diverge into a little bit of a rant. We can't talk about collaboration without discussing open source. This is something that we talk about a lot as an industry, but I don't think we've necessarily got to grips with, frankly. So let's quickly define open source. So open source software is made by many people and distributed under a license which grants all the rights to use, study, change, and share the software in modified and unmodified form. Bit of a mouthful. But what that comes down to is peer production, open access, a willingness to share, and transparent collaboration. These are the 4 key characteristics, and it's when we come to these characteristics that we as an industry currently fall down a huge amount. I'm going to go into an example about this. Rhino to Revit interoperability, a very dry topic. Probably half of all technology conference talks have been about this over the past 10 years. But most firms have had this issue. And over the years, many tools have been invented, whether internally in a practice or as external products, to tackle this one same issue. These are just some examples. We're on there as well. Manta Shrimp was developed at Grimshaw. These are just a small sample of the tools available, but given the sheer amount of effort that has gone into resolving this problem in a variety of different ways, it's fantastic. It's fascinating to think about what could have been achieved if that effort had been consolidated and what could have been achieved with the remaining time afterwards. This is a relatively basic task, where it's simply a matter of efficiency. This is just about us needing to work faster. But what if we looked at a more crucial societal issue, like sustainability, how we measure the whole life carbon of a design? As with interoperability, we're starting to see the same pattern emerge, with firms creating their own approaches and tools and doing exactly the same thing all of the time. If we continue in this manner behind disparate closed doors, we're not going to make the meaningful progress that we need to in order to make the required impact that we as an industry have a responsibility to do. And I say closed doors, but a lot of this work has been labeled as open source. The issue is that open source should facilitate collaboration. It should encourage companies to work together on common goals. And this is then undermined because everybody is creating and open sourcing the same thing. At which point we question why we bother open sourcing in the first place. It's like us all hosting an open house party on the same night. Nobody's going to turn up. And then, of course, there's AI. And we're starting to see the same trend emerge. We're starting to see everybody starting to invent the the same tools, the same processes to do the same thing. And all of these are areas where the industry, frankly, starts to stagnate if we don't collaborate, if we don't put aside our pride for a moment and accept that someone else has developed that tool, has solved that problem, and we can now move forward onto the next thing. And then finally, in terms of this practice-wide approach to openness, just how we can be more open as an industry is looking at actually how we can start to challenge the norms that we face. By that, I mean, don't just adopt technology to emulate or speed up existing processes, but actually question the validity of those processes in the first place. We do have a habit of using technology and innovation to create digital versions of manual processes without questioning if that even makes sense anymore. So that's something that we can look to stop. And this brings up a challenge that I've been more personally involved in over the past few years. Beyond our day-to-day work and with a focus on openness and efficiency, Grimshaw have been part of a grassroots industry-led conversation around what the future of technology can look like. These conversations opened up the idea that open dialogue cannot just allow us to make better use of technologies at our disposal, but also allow us as an industry to influence the technologies that we use for the betterment of us as practices and the overarching challenges that we face. And this culminated last year in the Future AEC Software Specification. First of all, a bit of a plug. I'm going to give a quick run through of this now, but if you want more information, you want to digest at your own pace, please head online and have a look. And the cameras are going down. So let's rewind a little bit. Back when we were all stuck at home, when we were still on Zoom, probably not wearing trousers, just a top half because we were all, stuck behind screens in COVID. The largest design firms in the UK, who we meet regularly as a peer network to review and discuss evolution in the AEC software space, most of that group and some additional authors made a very public comment about the relationship that we had to one specific vendor and their design tools. This was co-authored by approximately 30 of the UK's largest firms, and many who also didn't publicly put their name to it. It did go on to receive more than 200 signatures of support from global design firms. And then following that original open letter in September 2022, the Nordics got involved. They released their own open letter to, again, that nameless firm. And that was actually released by National Architectural Associations of Norway, Finland, Denmark, and Iceland. They received another 300 companies signing up to support this initiative. And since then, we've been in discussions with members of that group and also the AIA Large Firm Roundtable to actually think about what we can do next. We wanted to take a much more proactive approach to this. Rather than reacting to one specific vendor, we wanted to see how we can be much more proactive as an industry and start to drive the conversation ourselves. And so we exchanged and collaborated on various topics, but specifically this future of design software. And so we moved to that proactive stance, and this was launched at the Next Dev conference in 2023. It was presented by Aaron Perry from HMM and then published online. And this really is going to be a bit of an overview of what that specification is and what the driving factors behind it were. So when we started it, we set out some very key principles that we wanted the spec to align to. We wanted a modular approach over one single solution. We didn't want one monolithic software that would get very, very incrementally developed. We wanted a network of technologies that could start to work together and feed off one another. We wanted it to be both industry and vendor-led. By that, I mean there are areas of this where we as industry need to drive the conversation, but we are not software developers. And so there are areas where our vendors need to also drive the conversation as well. In that vein, this is a specification. It's not a solution. A lot of the questions we've had since then is, well, have you done all of that yet? I was like, no, we haven't. We're saying what we want. We're not necessarily going to be doing it ourselves. We recognize that we don't, frankly, have the knowledge or expertise to deliver software, but we do know people who do, and we know what we want of that software. And then there's this underlying principle that software should be an enabler, not an obstacle. Our design teams should not be fighting against the software that they are using to do the work that they want to do. And so in terms of the mission statement of this, we went through a number of iterations of this to try and arrive at the statement of what we wanted to be able to achieve. And so we've developed this software specification. It's going to be made public for the industry to influence and continue to drive forward. It's not a technical wish list of buttons and tools, but it's meant to be a strategic specification for what future design tools should be. It must support our ability to effectively capture and communicate creative ideas into digitized communicative and collaborative data, which in turn is valuable and viable for our collaborators to use during the construction stage. Even greater certainty and confidence to the viability of constructing the project within budget and scope. Quite novel, but we think our software should enable that. Then we're talking about tools that can relate to one another, used from large firms down to single practitioners, where the best tool for the job is always used. We're not talking about a 2.0 of one product, a monolith that does everything, but multiple tools within this ecosystem, where we are using whichever is best to solve our need. And this way of working is orientated around the free flowing of data between tools, as we saw in that last presentation, i.e. both geometry, but also the ones and zeros and everything else that goes with it. And so specification is composed around 10 key points. The foundation part is how we feel that we're going to break our software silos. Our foundation is this data framework. It lays the groundwork for breaking the silos that our tool sets currently create, i.e. we want our tools to be able to speak to one another without having to fight against it. The next section is looking at functionality. This is how we want our software to behave. This is the qualities, the experience that we as users want to actually have from our software, which we aren't necessarily seeing from the major softwares that we use today. These can be hybrid compute. We shouldn't be tethered to one single desktop. We should be able to work on desktops, work remotely. Our managers should be able to, take a tablet, do whatever they need to do. We should be able to work in the same design files across whatever medium we want to. We need to be able to work at context and scale, from city block level down to nuts and bolts, without having to switch between multiple different platforms and exchange data as we go along. We want a better user experience. We want to actually enjoy, well, I say enjoy. We want to be able to use software easily and actually, get out of it what we need to without having to consult online or user manuals and things like that. And we want better modeling capability. Currently, we're stuck between two paradigms, whether that's object-based modeling, i.e. BIM, or whether it's more free flow, maybe NURBS-based modeling, for instance. The two aren't necessarily fully compatible, but ideally we should do, because each has their own place in the design process. And then there's the 4 capabilities that we feel are crucial to be enabled. These are going to help us tackle issues that we as an industry face. Our current software stack is built around a very traditional mode of delivering projects. That's not necessarily the world that we work in now. So we need tools that will enable responsible design. When you talk about responsible design, you immediately jump to sustainability and carbon, but it's also down to economy, down to social impact. Our software needs to enable that in the best way it can do. It's not going to do everything, because that's down to the design teams, but it should at least enable those processes. We need to have a better understanding of DFMA and MMC. Current software doesn't actually understand what a modular building is. It just puts pieces together. We want software that enables automation, i.e. when we identify something that is repetitive and where there is the opportunity to do it more efficiently, our software should enable that, whether that's through configuration or maybe it's through AI-based processes. And then there's deliverables. Actually, deliverables should become incidental to the software that we use. We shouldn't necessarily have to spend all of our time curating a perfect deliverable set, when actually our software should be doing that for us, and we should be designing as our core process, our core activity. And then obviously we can't talk about software without talking about usage and licensing. And this is where we can help define what is valuable and what isn't, both for us as consumers, but also for vendors as providers as well. We appreciate this has to be a two-way street. And it's really on this first point around foundation, around breaking our silos, that we really start to tie in with the theme of this talk today. By wanting our tools to speak a common language, we're seeking to remove those silos of proprietary file formats or even data formats that are now emerging. I will say we're still in the very early days of working with both industries, both AEC and software, to figure out how this is going to manifest. But this is one of the parts where we feel that this needs to be an industry-led conversation enabled by vendors. But as I say, after that, if anyone is interested or wants to support, we'd love to hear from you. Please get in touch, give us your ideas, and we'll keep working on this. It's very much an on-the-side initiative, on the side of our day jobs, but it's something we're actively pushing to do. And obviously, I have to mention that the ARC Manu program has been an incredible supporter, advocate, and catalyst for the specification from its very earliest days. And in fact, a lot of the early conversations as part of the program use the specification as somewhat of a framework for talking about the topic of digital transformation, which was really heartening to see. And so to summarize, the ideas put forward across both practice and industry challenges to technology, looking at accessibility, exchange, language, ideas, collaboration, and challenging, have all seen success, but they're all still a work in progress. They all need to accelerate as we move forward to tackle the major issues facing our industry today and also our practices individually. And with that, I will say thank you. Do you want to work in, Mike?
Thank you very much for that. I'm going to open the floor to questions.
Andy, fantastic, inspiring and all the rest of it. With Rhino, if you try and put a golf ball inside a tennis ball and say I want to do a Boolean subtraction of one from the other, you don't get it. You have to cut the tennis ball in half, do one, do the other, and put them back together again. Now, in conversations with them since Rhino 2, it was always going to be the next. Yep, we've got it. We know it. We know the problem. We understand it. Next version. So my question is about fixing something as opposed to just starting from scratch. And so most of my conversations over the years, fairly high, well, very high level, with some of the companies, including McNeil, is, well, yes, but we've got legacy issues, we're dealing with them, but we can't afford to. I remember when Windows used to talk about the next version is going to be bottom up, starting right again. They never did. Is there any way with the combined intelligence and people putting just a few hours in each rather than a couple of people committed to just saying, let's just begin this from the very beginning, forget all of the legacy issues around data structures for particular proprietary companies, or is that just too hard? Because my slightly jaundiced view is that unless we kick off from scratch with all 20, 30, 40 years now of experience, we can say exactly what the problem is. Maybe we could actually say what a better starting point is.
You went right in there at the beginning. Okay, so I think with that, there is definitely the opportunity to do that. And actually, I think something like ARC Manu is a great opportunity to experiment with some of that. I think there's a lot of lessons learned that can be drawn from the industry partners and from the wider industry as well about actually what works, what doesn't work, and experiment with, can something be built from scratch? I think, the underlying thing that I haven't really spoken about as part of this is how do those new softwares get off the ground? How do they actually start to gain traction? There are some, great startups we're starting to see from the Nordics, like Conic and others, which are actually enabling some of the functionality that we're talking about. But then there's an issue of scale and how actually they start to break into an industry that, frankly, is wed to probably 2 or 3 different vendors, one in particular, but with another couple on the side. How do they actually break into that? And I think at that point, we need to start thinking about changing the tact internally to actually enabling our design teams to have a better digital literacy, to work much more nimbly across different things and be able to embrace new softwares as they come along. But going to your point about, can we just start from scratch? Can we almost do a tabula rasa? I think it's an interesting proposition, but I think the business case needs to line up with it to actually make it work. And that's where it becomes incredibly tricky.
Yeah, thanks. That was really fantastic, Andy. Maybe along the lines what Mark just asked. I mean, my understanding of Rhino was born out of frustration of people who started online about the company that remains unnamed in your presentation, and started from scratch. And I was wondering. I mean, it's fantastic to see this kind of initiative and the backing around that. And I just thought, well, if everybody would I have no idea how much it is to start from scratch, but there's an enormous support already. Like, I mean, what was it, like easily 1,000 practices who are backing this. And if they're serious about it, if everybody is really serious about it and puts a little bit of money towards it, I think, I mean, you could start immediately in a way. I mean, it's Microsoft's competitor is an open source. I mean, this is a kind of what my understanding is you're advocating for. It's not actually held by any particular vendor. It's the community who generates and develops and modifies that. So have you had this conversation among those, I guess, signatories?
Yeah, we have. So as I mentioned in the 10 points of the specification, the data framework we feel is the one point that we as industry need to lead. And we've started to look at models around how that could work from a governance level, whether it's like a Linux Foundation or something like that. Because all of the other areas are things that we're happy for software vendors to lead upon. They know we want them and they can help put them together. But data, i.e. the stuff that we do, the stuff that we exchange, that's what we feel that we need to be able to shape. Otherwise, it's like the tail wagging the dog if the vendors are shaping our data for us. And so, yes, we have started to think about that. It's still, it's still a year on, but again, it is early stages trying to figure out how we do that. We are still talking to a number of the bigger vendors like Autodesk, like Bentley, like Dassault System, that they're actually quite supportive, but obviously want to integrate all of this into their own systems. But at the same time, we are thinking about how we can be a bit more independent around that. And we have also had that quite frank conversation around how actually do we collaborate on this? What is that swords at the door policy that we try and look at, which has its own journey to go on until we have an idea about how we can do that. Well, I mean, that's frankly where it started. We said this is our annual spend as a collective of practices on software. This is what is on the table if you build us better software. We want to pay for good software. We don't want it to be done for free necessarily, but we did put out there, what is the incentive?
So thanks for that. That was good. The obvious paradigm for this is web stuff, and I'm sure you've looked at that. But the thing that sort of interests me about that is that it ends up being an ecosystem, and I'm sure it wasn't intentional, but it came across as that this was going to end up as a kind of monolithic thing. And I think that the thing that interests me about it is thinking about the Linux ecosystem and the web ecosystem, that somebody can write a better sort algorithm and everyone will switch to it, and it won't really change anything because of that interface paradigm where you're like, okay, this bit and this bit stay the same, but the insides change, or something along those lines. So I guess the question is, do you think that as an industry we're big enough to support an ecosystem of tools that can be viable? Or do you think that we have to kind of push down some sort of get on board or get lost kind of model?
I think we're already doing that. I think remove design from design software and just look at the software that we as practices use, and the advent of more cloud-based tools, whether it's Miro, Zoom, Teams. We use Asana quite a lot. That is an ecosystem of interoperable tools. It's happening more organically, but in the rest of the business, it's already happening. There's no reason why it can't necessarily happen on the design side of things, as long as there is the ability to interchange data between them.
But all of those tools you mentioned are, if we think about us being the only people in the world who matter, they're heavily supported by all the other people.
Yeah.
Whereas there's not going to be 1,000 like local government health authorities that are paying for Miro to pay for us to have the cool things that we want.
No, fair enough. But there are those organizations that you mentioned are clients of the AEC industry. So I think that's where there needs to be conversation at that level to actually understand what they want from our product and what we provide to them and what is the best way of providing them. At the moment, a lot of our contracts say we need your design in an RVT file. That's not happened because they need a Revit file. That's happened because Autodesk have spoken to them and have said, we are the BIM platform, i.e. you need to be asking for RVT files. So I think we need to start to break that down. It's a huge undertaking and a lot to do, but there is that capability.
I think we're caught in an equilibrium problem. So it's kind of like if you have a board game, everybody is playing, and at some point there's a tipping point where somebody can actually win, and then the momentum builds up. So in that sense, all the different architecture firms are competing for the same work. We've got probably producing more graduates than we need. And then you have the automation, the AI also undercutting the need for so many architects to come through. And then you have kind of open source alternative BIM software, like there's That Open Company, or there's Bonsai that used to be called Blender BIM. You could argue Speckle's kind of not quite one of those, but it's a node that interfaces with everyone else. But the problem is, I think even if one of those open source companies produced a software that was better than Revit, everybody at the company would have to be retrained. So even if they produced something and it was free, you'd still have all the cost of changing over all your families, retraining everybody, developing all the systems up again. So I guess do we just surrender to Revit realism? Are we just going to be drug addicts for the rest of our careers, or is there a way to break that? Can we use just the existing tools we already have, like Rhino Inside and Speckle, and just build better interoperability and actually scale them so they're not just something that only a tiny elite of computational design talented people can actually use, but we could actually scale that for everybody?
If you want to, feel free. But I would also suggest that actually when you look at the development pipeline for companies like Autodesk, Revit's not going to be around for much longer. It's very much, look at even the Autodesk University in the last couple of weeks. There are a lot of the announcements being made from that are going to start moving to Forma, which is cloud-based. A lot of that whole process, that ecosystem is going to be broken down. And so, by all means, you can, cave into that, but you are also locking yourself into essentially a deadline of how much, or an expiry date of how long that skill set is going to be valid for. So, this is why I made a bit of a statement there about internally. A lot of our process is around digital literacy. It's around how we actually start to make our design teams more nimble when it comes to the digital platforms they're using. Because whilst there is that current lock-in. We accept that. We are a Revit organization. By doing that, it future-proofs us for when we can start to move across to something else, because there is that nimbleness that's brought in by digital literacy. So I would probably counsel against surrendering at this point.
Okay. As a Linux user, I totally believe that open source OS and most of the softwares I use are open source. It actually works. So I totally like your idea of having open source in the AEC sector. We have very good precedents, Google and Meta, that presented essentially the famous paper that attention is all you need, which resulted in ChatGPT and things like that. So we have very good precedents from giant companies. Actually, you cannot compare AEC firms to those giants. And if they are doing it, they should have a good reason. If you know what can be that reason and how can AEC learn from them and be more open about sharing what they actually built in terms of tools and the knowledge. Thank you.
That's a good question. I would point to an example like the media industry, where the advent of the USD format, which isn't a perfect analogy, but it's an example. Because essentially, Pixar came out and said, we're going to define a file format, and the entirety of the media industry took that on because they had the weight to push that agenda. And a lot of the, let's say, proprietary file formats that were around at the time, things like Maya from Autodesk, for instance, that became an editor rather than this silo of information. So there is the ability for that kind of movement. There is precedent for it. There isn't within our industry. There isn't that beast of an organization, that Pixar level entity that's going to be able to do that. But that's why we've started to have these conversations to see if can we actually band together to collaboratively become that beast. And so that's really where some of these ideas started to gestate, is actually can we start to force that change ourselves?
What's the thinking around the programming languages? We've sort of been locked into C++ and C# for a while, and there's now sort of movements to look at memory safety. Rust, Zig is a new language on the block. Are you kind of trying to position for something like Rust? Because the ecosystem there is pretty immature for CAD.
I'm going to say we haven't really thought about that yet, because it's still early days. We're still trying to figure out, actually, does this thing have legs? Can we take it forward? And frankly, I don't have the wherewithal to actually answer that question. But it's a very valid point, but it's probably, a while down the line.
Hello, Andy. You talked about training your staff into all these new technologies and the young graduates coming out. What challenges do you have with? Do you have some young graduates coming? Oh, but I came to become an architect. I'm not a programmer, or I'm not tech savvy. Do you have some challenges with training people?
No, I'd say it's the opposite. Not that young graduates don't want to be architects. I think they absolutely do, but I think they are now being more and more trained in contemporary tool sets, and so there is less of, we're pushing against an open door when it comes to training new graduates. I think that's not necessarily a concern for us right now. But even when I talk about training, it's not that we are training every member of staff to be a computational designer. Absolutely not at all. We're training them to be able to use the contemporary tools that they need to use to do their job today. And that's just design tools. It's just trying to get them, savvy and literate in that sense, so that then, they can work efficiently as a team, as a unit.
Any more questions?
Thanks, Andy. Really enjoyed the talk. I just wanted to ask, do you see utility or value in closed systems? And I'm asking specifically because when we think about design quality, historically, often closed systems may result in higher quality outputs. And maybe just some reflection, on that position as to how do we ensure and pursue design quality in an open system?
No, I think that's a valid point, and I do see the value in closed systems. A lot of what I talked about as part of the future spec is more around actually setting that common playing field within which a lot of our activity can take place. There is then the ability for us to take things forward to using a Git style lexicon to actually fork something and then close it and make it of your own to actually suit a particular offer, a particular IP that you as an organization have, at which point that becomes closed. But if it's starting from a common ground, then that just makes it so much easier because there is that ability to then exchange data, etc. It's what I said as part of the presentation. When it comes to our IP and our offer, and that includes our own internally developed technologies, then absolutely it makes sense to be competitive on those. That's how we remain viable as businesses. But the openness is really the base level. It's the foundation. It's the starting point for all of that.
Speaking of trying to get the whole industry to push together, have you also considered bringing on government, whether it be local, state, federal, just trying to get them within the push for a more open system? Because I feel that vendors would, although we speak with the money, vendors do also listen to how regulations are inputted. I don't know if that was a question.
No. I get where you're coming from. Yes, I think that is a definite route that we can go down. A potential route to that is around our industry associations. So whether it's like REBA in the UK or the AIA or anyone like that, but there is a limited amount of influence or impact that those organizations have. Probably the closest and most akin to this is the EU around their anti-competition laws and rulings, in that that's something they're very hot on and have actually in the past sued Autodesk on. And so there is that ability to start to engage with that a lot more. So it's not something we've done yet, but I think it does have legs.
I've got a question about the fragmentation issue that you mentioned, and how that relates to the kind of approaches to the BIM modeling and the kind of the way you work. And I guess it's sort of those graphs of where the hump is and where the best value. You should be doing all of your BIM modeling right up front, and that'll save you money because that's the best spot. But if you're bidding in a monthly, the situation of you might not have, you're doing all that work that you're not reaping the benefits of. It might be some other practice that might benefit from all of that hard work of the beautifully set up BIM model. Do you have any thoughts on what impact that might have on the overall approach to the way you work, the technologies that you use?
I think it's a really valid point, and it's something that is particularly close to us at the moment, and we've started to see a lot. And I think this is why I think we want to push for our technology stack to be more standard, so that actually spinning up a project can happen a lot more seamlessly, rather than at the moment it might be a week of setting up the standard, setting up the model, getting the team onboarded. That could be a fairly significant percentage of the time that you've got to do that work. And so if that can actually become a lot more instantaneous, just to the point of opening the program and it's there set up, perfect. So it is very relevant, and it's something that we're trying to streamline as much as possible. It's when I was starting to talk about digital transformation at an organizational level. Actually, think of all the different factors that need to come into play when we start a new project or a new stage. Yes, there's the design side of things, but there's also working with our finance team to get everything set up. There's working with legal to understand, have we got the right agreements in place? There's working with HR to make sure that resourcing has happened. Do we have the right skills? All of these things need to actually start to speak to one another much more intrinsically than they necessarily do, or they're necessarily set up to do. And so it's to tackle those kind of issues, which is why we're looking at this.
Yeah, and I guess the other follow-up question is, it baffles me how this could be better value for the client, because if they're chopping and changing between different architects, all of that lost knowledge, the modeling, the project knowledge, just I can't see how this could actually save them money. But
well, speaking for examples in the UK where we've seen this, and it's particularly around some of the infrastructure projects that we've worked on, that we might do concept design and then we have to retender for the next. At which point you can kind of understand where the client's coming from. They want to think, rather than somebody pitching a fee at the very beginning, which might be too high, they want each stage to be, retendered, to have a new fee put forward for it, which might make it a bit more economically savvy. What they're not thinking about is exactly what you're saying, of the next design team, who may not be the incumbent, coming in, picking up all of this work and trying to get their heads around the point at which the previous team was actually where they left it off. And then, frankly, there's also the pride factor, which is, I think we can all safely say, architects are quite prideful beings. You're not going to think, okay, that previous incumbent, they did a cracking job on that architecture. We can't really improve on that, so let's just take it forward. They're probably going to think, actually, it's not that good. We could do better. Let's go in. So, it's. I personally feel that it's a flawed system. I probably don't know enough. I'm sure there are probably other aspects around it. I'm looking at it from a digital perspective, basically how we can pick up that work in a much more nimble way, and how we can operate in a much more nimble way.
Can I ask one more question? Just following up on the golf ball inside the tennis ball thing, which reminded me of AutoCAD, where we used to use the X-clip. You'd do a polygon around the whole thing, and then you'd really thin 2 lines, and then you'd clip out the bit. But I was wondering, because that was quite enjoyable, and I wonder if, were you talking about that interoperability, is that not part of the enjoyment that you get from architecture, as a, that it is, you're kind of using these tools in the wrong way, and that's, when Revit can do those curvy surfaces, that's when they become not cool. It's like when Daryl Jackson started putting facades that had the chunky parametrics, then it's like, that's the end of that. Do you think, maybe I'll leave that as a comment.
I was going to say, I don't necessarily have an answer to that. I think you use whatever software you want to use to do it.
All right, last question before we wrap up.
Question. So this whole retendering thing's blown my mind a little bit. What would happen if just all AEC companies just turned around and said, no, we're not going to do that? I mean, obviously, they need a pact, but it sounds a bit like doing software. They need a pact and an agreement.
That's not going to happen. quite simply.
But what's the client going to do if the client literally cannot then go off to someone else and say, oh, we want to retender, and the company says, no, actually, no, we don't do that. As an industry, we don't retender. What would happen?
I don't know. Yeah.
Which sounds like the problem of this open source.
At that point, it becomes a race to the bottom. So, one, I don't think it's going to happen, but if it did, there would be somebody in the world who would do it.
Thank you so much. Can everybody please put your hands together and thank Andy for that great session? Thank you. So that brings